Hello, everyone. How are you today? I'm Elizabeth Corey, and I'm the founder of beatingtrauma.com. And we are here today to talk about trauma. It's 12 noon Eastern on Tuesday. And we down here in Florida are getting ready for a potential significant disaster. So I thought that should inform my topic for today. So my topic for today is dealing with the uncontrollable, because that's what's coming up for me. Now, to be fair, almost every single time that I do a live stream, it is informed based on what is going on in my life at the moment. So this is actually not unusual. It's just there's a very clear and blatant thing that is impacting my thought processes right now. And so I'm going to talk about that. A lot of times it's not quite so blatant as it is today. So I want to talk about dealing with the uncontrollable, because we have a lot of belief systems that basically come to fruition, that play into our issues around controlling our environment and controlling things. So I want to kind of go over some of those to help us today. Let's talk about this idea of controlling the uncontrollable, because the truth is most of us had chaos and our fear that is associated with that chaos used against us as children. So it's not that surprising that one of the most common trauma responses is like a very serious desire to control every aspect of our lives that we can possibly control, right? That makes all the sense in the world. And we will resort to some pretty intense ways of dealing, of controlling these things. Like, we can come up with some pretty interesting techniques to try to control our environment, and not just in controlling it, but also in convincing ourselves that so it may be that we are actually in fact not controlling our environment, but we will have convinced ourselves that we are in fact controlling the environment. But the truth is that we will spend a tremendous amount of energy attempting to control the uncontrollable. And so I want to spend some time today looking and kind of exploring the thoughts that we may have around this, thoughts that we are struggling with when the uncontrollable does hit, which it always will. As a matter of fact, there are a lot fewer things we can control in our world today than we actually think. And you may have already figured out, I'm sure you have, which part it is that usually does a lot of this controlling. It's probably going to be the part that I refer to as the controller, and that is true. It is the part I refer to as a controller that does the controlling. But they also will do the sort of self-gaslighting to tell us we're in control of something when we in fact are not in control of that thing. But they will go through a lot of manipulation, gyrations, gaslighting, internal struggles to make it appear that we are in control of the uncontrollable when we are not. And there are a lot of reasons for that. There's a lot of emotion tied up in the idea that we are in fact not in control of something, of anything, and certainly not of life in general. So the controller wants us to stay away from those emotions. The other side of it is that a lot of times we are trying to control something because if we can figure out how to make that work, then it will resolve lots of other trauma we have from the past. So that is also another thing that shows up for us. Again, avoiding emotions by controlling our environment. This is a basic controller strategy. But let's talk about this kind of really uncomfortable set of belief systems we will often have around the uncontrollable, so that we can be aware that it's there. And as I normally probably would say to you, and you can probably figure this out, is that when we have these belief systems and we see these belief systems, they can make excellent writing prompts. So anything that I bring up here is something you can take to the page, and it will be helpful in getting to know how your controller views the world, how they see the world. So it is all a very good idea to do writing from these places. So the first one I want to talk about is that the uncontrollable is always bad. Okay. Now, when we were growing up, that may have been true, right? And that's one of the things we have to acknowledge, that most of our belief systems come from experience, right? Our parts are extremely experience based. And so it may be that many things we were not able to control in childhood, maybe 99% of them actually turned out to be bad things, okay? So this idea is not that far-fetched. As a matter of fact, when I said it, you may have been thinking, well, duh. Of course the uncontrollable is bad. What is this woman even suggesting? That uncontrollable things are not bad? Obviously, this hurricane is bad. I mean, there's no way you're going to look at that any other way, right? It's bad. We would prefer to have it just go away, right? We don't want it. So that's important to understand. But at the same time, there are many things that are uncontrollable, that are controlled more on an energetic or universal level, or are more based on things that are a bit more grounded, right? Because this kind of controlling stuff is highly ungrounded, that actually are in fact good things. And as a matter of fact, as we heal our tendency to try to control the uncontrollable, and we do allow some things to play out how they are meant to play out, we can find that actually many things that we cannot control externally or with this frontal lobe are in fact good things. So we do need to write from this notion that anything we cannot control is bad. That is definitely the controller coming out and saying that. The next one I want to discuss might sound a little bit more far-fetched, but it is that the uncontrollable is my fault. Again, remember what I just said. Our parts are highly experience-based, right? So they were probably told that many things that were plaguing your childhood or plaguing your family in your childhood were, in fact, your fault. This is a very common message that we hear when we grow up in traumatic and abusive households, that whatever is going on is our fault. I remember when I first met my karma kid, and believe me, this is actually a common karma kid belief that I'm expressing here. When I first met my karma kid, I met them because they said something sort of ridiculous. And sometimes that is how we meet our parts, when they say something that's so over the top that we actually notice it. Before that, they're a little bit more under the surface and we might not notice them. But in this case, my karma kid told me that a tornado in another state was in fact my fault. Now, that sort of stopped me in my tracks. I'd never realized that I had any such thoughts anywhere near like that before. And it was the first time I'd ever really acknowledged that there may be thoughts in my system that were like this. Again, I did not make this stuff up. This is stuff I was told by various abusers throughout my childhood, that I was such a bad human being that I could create natural disasters in other places, or even in my place, right? Like this current hurricane. So this idea that it's my fault, that big uncontrollable things are happening, definitely is coming from a brainwashing pattern in my own family of origin and the other people who were abusive to me. So that idea that that the uncontrollable is my fault is definitely a belief system that needs to be worked with. And so whenever you hear anything even close to this, it is important to do writing from this place, because if it's uncontrollable by humans, it's uncontrollable. Right? It doesn't mean that there's going to be a situation where you can control bad things, but you can't control good things. That's not how it works. But that sense that we are in some way inherently bad, inherently evil, is something that sits with the karmic and messes with us on an unconscious level a lot of the time. So we need to acknowledge that those kind of belief systems may in fact be there, right? The other thing, the next one I want to talk about is also a big karmic hit belief system, which is the uncontrollable is punishment. Now, sometimes it'll be punishment from abusers, sometimes it'll be punishment from God, sometimes it'll be punishment from the universe. But in fact, those uncontrollable things that are happening, which are always going to be bad and always going to be my fault, are also punishment. They are happening to me because I have made bad decisions, I have broken contracts, I have done something that I'm not supposed to do. Sometimes we don't even know what that thing is. Like, our parts sometimes have to work very hard to figure out what it is we've done, but they will usually manage to come up with something. So the uncontrollable becomes a punishment, right? And I have certainly heard that language around the hurricane, that somehow this hurricane is punishing me because I moved to Florida, or I am breaking my contracts with my family of origin, or I am attempting to live life to the fullest and I am not allowed to do that. I mean, I can go on and on and on. But these kind of messages are critical writing for us, because if not, we're going to be spinning on all this stuff in the unconscious while we are, in fact, maybe having to deal with something that has happened in our lives. It's one of the reasons why when things go wrong, and I'm not talking about, in this case, the hurricane. Oh, there's things that go wrong. For example, we get a flat tire, right? Uncontrollable. We can't, okay, we won't drive over a pile of roofing nails, but in general, many flat tires are quite uncontrollable. They happen, right? But it's very difficult to deal with the scenario in front of us if in the back of our mind, in that unconscious space, we're spending all of our time going, this is your fault. This is punishment. This is because you're bad. This is because you're evil. This is because you did this thing last week that you shouldn't have done. And look, here's your punishment. All this stuff creates a very strong reaction in us to that uncontrollable thing, and can make it very difficult for us to just deal with the thing that's in front of us, right? So I just want to stress this, that it can be very helpful to do writing from these sorts of belief systems so that we can face in a much more grounded way the thing that is in fact in front of us in the moment, right? So, but this is something that I've seen in my own life many, many times. Now, the next one I want to talk about is also a karma kid one. And that is that the uncontrollable will always haunt me or haunt us, right? This is a futile feeling, and it has to do with this idea that there is no escape. There is no escape from the bad things. We can't get away. No matter how much work we do on ourselves, no matter how much healing, no matter how many steps we take in the external world, cannot make our lives better, because there are too many things we can't control, and they are always going to happen at us, and they are always going to make a mess of things for us. And that is a big part of our futile messaging. Now, to be very clear, yes, there are a lot of uncontrollable things that are going to happen to us in our lives. We cannot avoid that. That is a guarantee. Uncontrollable things will happen. This idea that they will haunt us, or there is no escape, or they will always be bad, they will always destroy our lives around us. This is a futile message coming from that karma kid, and coming in very loud and clear to us a lot of the time. In fact, there are many uncontrollable things that will actually make our lives better, turn our lives around, eliminate things from our lives that aren't supposed to be there. The universe is attempting to help us have the life we actually deserve. And I mean that in a good way, not in a bad way. So it's like, okay, what we may be uncontrollably losing in the moment might feel like a punishment, or like it's our fault, or like we will always be haunted by this. But as we write from these things, we can sometimes see that there's another way of looking at what's going on around us. It can be very difficult to find it. And believe me, when I talk about the hurricane, I do not see that there will be a positive side to that. That's not what I'm trying to say. Some things are just bad. That's it. They're bad, right? But when we start looking at the triggers that are associated with those things and processing the fear that that is bringing up in us, the good that can come from that is something. And I highly recommend that we use opportunities where our fear is high to explore what's going on in our system and where it came from. What are the beliefs that I'm carrying that are not serving me and my life and the decisions that I'm making every day? Okay, that's an important part of what we're trying to figure out when we allow ourselves to follow those emotional triggers to where they are going. And sometimes that's the only good thing that happens out of things that are going on externally. It's just what we are able to learn from it, what we are able to emotionally process from it. That's it. That's all we get. That's the good, right? And a lot of times, let's face it, it doesn't feel good at the time, right? Oftentimes it feels really yucky to sit in those feelings, of course. So the last one I want to talk about is really coming from a place of a very stubborn controller. I'll be honest, but it's often there, which is the uncontrollable is always controllable. Like if there's something that's not controllable, we have just not figured out the way to control it yet, okay? So this is a really common controller belief system. It's very important for us to spend some time with it because I'll be honest, sometimes we can make a pretty big mess of our lives. I am speaking from personal experience by trying to control something that has absolutely no controllability whatsoever. So I'm here to tell you that those things are, really you're not going to find a solution. You're not going to find a way to control it. It isn't going to happen. Things are going to happen and they are not going to be within your control. And the more you obsess about it, and the more you worry about it, and the more you spin, okay, these are the spin cycles. Spin cycles in the mind are 90% uncontrollable things, really, I promise. And if they are controllable things, we can think about them just one time and figure it out, but we don't need to be thinking about it all the time, right? This is controller mentality. So when you feel yourself saying there must be a solution, I need to think harder about it. I need to do more things. I need to figure out how to get people and places and things to do what I want them to do. Then you are very often spending a lot of time on nonsense. And in a sense, there is a level of distraction happening when we are focused on cycling through solutions to the uncontrollable. And I'll be honest, there's just a lot of things we're not going to be able to control. And thinking about them nonstop is how we stop ourselves from actually processing the emotions that are coming up because of this thing, right? I've done lots of things over the years. I've done it all. I've cleaned my entire house before a hurricane, thinking that maybe the hurricane would spare my house if it was clean, right? I've bought all the water. Don't get me wrong, we should buy water. But I bought all the water. I bought all the gas. I've done all the things. I've done all the things that I could do that were within my control. Nothing ever stopped the hurricane from doing whatever the hurricane was going to do, right? So spinning about it 24/7 is a way of keeping ourselves from focusing on what we can do, but also the emotions that we are in fact feeling that need to be addressed. Fear needs to be addressed. We can't just ignore it, or we can't just take external actions to address the fear. We need to spend time with it. We need to express from it. We need to let it speak about what it thinks is going to happen to us. What's the worst case scenario? I know you may be thinking, why would I want to speak that into existence? But that's not actually what happens when we write. I want to be very clear that when we write, we actually start releasing the hold that those fears have on us. When we write, it does not speak things into existence. That's not how it works, right? Actually having all that fear in the unconscious, in that place, that is actually the manifesting place. So we actually want to pull that stuff out, want to put it in the frontal lobe. We want to write it down on the page because that shines a light on that shadowy fear and it helps it to leave. It helps it to release and leave us in a better state so that we can deal with this world, which, let's face it, can sometimes be pretty scary. So we want to be able to deal with this world with the least amount of traumatic, overwhelming fear in our system that we can, right? So that's what I have for you guys today. Maybe a little shorter than usual. Who knows? When I get a little stressed, maybe I talk a little faster. Hopefully you guys could hear me okay today. And I wasn't talking too fast. But I really do appreciate you guys all being here with me today. Thank you, Lucy. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Trish. Glad you guys have joined me today. Yeah, we're getting ready for some pretty big activity here in Florida. I am going to keep dealing with my own fear around it, writing from that, processing, doing what I can externally, which will not be stopping a hurricane, despite all of my controller's best efforts. And just addressing what I can in my own system to make this at least a teeny bit doable, tolerable, whatever it may be. So thank you all so much for being here. And I will talk to you next Tuesday, as long as I have power. And until then, I hope you all are very well, and I will see you all very soon.